I saw a video on TikTok the other day of a chimp playing Minecraft, being trained with positive reinforcement to learn how to play Minecraft, okay? So don't come at me and say that positive reinforcement won't work for your horse, because guys, it works for every single animal on the planet. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hello, my name is Charlotte. I'm an Aussie horse trainer who is super passionate about spreading the word of positive reinforcement training. This is gonna completely transform your horsemanship, okay? This is such an underutilized training method. And for some reason, the horse world is so weird about it, and I'm there to kind of show you guys that you don't need to be scared of positive reinforcement training. It is just a training technique, a science-based training technique, just like every other one, only it works really, really quickly, and it's actually really easy once you figure out how to do it. So in today's video, I'm gonna be talking about everything that you need to know when you're starting positive reinforcement training, because there is a lot to know. I learnt this through trial and error. I had to just figure it out mostly by myself. And I don't want you guys to do that as well. I want you guys to have it easily accessible so that you can do it right from the get-go and get the most out of it. So let's get started. So just like any training method, positive reinforcement can be done well and it can be done really badly. If you do it badly, you can negatively impact you and your horse's relationship and your horse's behavior, because it is a very powerful tool. Something that I cannot stress enough is that giving your horse treats is not the same thing as training with positive reinforcement. To effectively train with positive reinforcement, you need to have an underlying understanding of the theory behind it, just like any other training method, and it's gonna take time to learn. The biggest thing that people struggle with positive reinforcement training is that the mindset is very different to other forms of training that you may be used to. So it can be quite hard to kind of shift the way that you think about your horse's behavior so that you can use positive reinforcement to its fullest potential. If you found me through my other social media channels, you may already know what positive reinforcement training is, or you may have some idea, but I'm just gonna go over it for anyone who is new here and you're like, what the heck is positive reinforcement? Positive reinforcement just means that we are using something that the horse really likes and wants to influence their behavior. So the same as if you have a dog, okay? If your dog sits, you give them a treat, and then your dog is more likely to sit again next time you ask because something good happened. That is the same thing that we're using with horses, the same principles, okay? The thing is, when you start using food with horses, there's a few things that you need to understand about how their brain works and how they are actually motivated by food, because it is not the same as a dog's brain, okay? Yes, the underlying mechanism of positive reinforcement is the same across species, but there are species-specific differences that we need to be aware of and work with, not against, if we want to harness the full potential of positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is actually the scientific term for the way that an animal, any animal, is able to learn. It is an evolutionary process that our brains, any living animal on this planet, that their brains have developed in a way that they're able to learn and adapt. That is how we survive, okay? Positive reinforcement has been studied a lot in science. This is because there's a lot of research out there on children, on autistic behavioral problems that have been going on for years and years and years. Now there's quite a lot of new research coming out in animals and positive reinforcement, especially because of the zoo community. I saw a video on TikTok the other day of a chimp, I think it was a chimp, playing Minecraft, being trained with positive reinforcement to learn how to play Minecraft, okay? So don't come at me and say that positive reinforcement won't work for your horse, because guys, it works for every single animal on the planet. If it's not working, then it's because of the way that you're using it, not because it's positive reinforcement that's not working, okay? By definition, positive reinforcement works. And if it doesn't work, then you're not using positive reinforcement. It's science. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of the science if you just want to improve your relationship with your horse, okay? That's for nerds like me that are obsessed about this stuff and want to learn every single little tiny detail about it. What you need to know though is that there are 4 quadrants. So you've got positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, you've got positive punishment and negative punishment. I don't know, they're over there somewhere. Don't get too caught up about the positives and the negatives. It literally is just, again, a scientific term, meaning you add something or subtract something. Look, when I first learned this, it hurt my brain. So if it hurts your brain, don't worry too much, okay? The most important thing when you're training your horse is just make sure that your horse is having a good time. If your horse is having a good time, then you're most likely using positive reinforcement pretty well. So negative reinforcement, also known as pressure and release. So that's typically how we've trained horses in the past. Horses are very, very intelligent. They can learn through quite a lot of different methods. They are very good at trying to figure out the answer, which is why positive reinforcement works so well for them in clicker training. But negative reinforcement does not necessarily mean bad, okay? That's all I'm gonna say on that for now. I will do other videos on negative reinforcement versus positive reinforcement. But you can use them together, and quite often in horse training, we do use them together. I use them together quite a lot. Again, just like any training method, you can use negative reinforcement really poorly, or you can use it really well. So don't get too caught up on positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Just focus on making sure your horse has a good time and having fun with it and learning together. Horses are grazing animals, okay? And this is really important when we're thinking about how we're going to use food to influence their behavior. So a grazing animal that has evolved over millions of years to continually be searching and grazing food in order to survive has a very, very strong internal, intrinsic motivation to seek out food. If they did not do that, they would not be able to graze as much as they do, and they would die out and they wouldn't pass along their genes, and then there'd be no horses around. Even though when we domesticated them, yes, we brought food to them, but your horses never stop grazing. Like, you can have all your horse's caloric needs met through like hard feeds that you may give once or twice a day, and your horse is still gonna be out there grazing because it's not based on hunger. Whereas with dogs and a lot of other species, especially predators, our intrinsic motivation to seek out food comes directly from our hunger. So those are two very key differences, okay? So what does that mean for our training? That means that you need to be aware of this really, really strong evolutionary intrinsic motivation that your horse has, this drive to seek out food when you're using food in training, because that is why horses quite often get issues like mugging, frustration around food, okay? So mugging is a completely natural behavior. That is what the horse does when it's searching for food. So what we need to do when we first start working with food is to teach our horses that no, you can just stand there quietly, the food comes to you, but also we teach them how to seek out that food in a different way. So that is what clicker training is. So when you use clicker training, you click, and then the horse knows that the food is coming. And you can click different behaviors. You harness that seeking system and you apply it to what you want. So instead of seeking out grass, that horse is now seeking out the click and the food that you're about to deliver. And that's why this is such a powerful tool, because you're like harnessing that evolutionary intrinsic motivation, that drive, for your own benefit to influence the behaviors that your horse does. And that's why when people start positive reinforcement and they're not teaching the horse the right things and they're not aware of how they're actually modifying, upregulating, hacking this system, then you can end up with horses that have quite bad behavioral problems, and then the person thinks that positive reinforcement doesn't work. It's not that positive reinforcement doesn't work. It's that it's being used incorrectly. Same as if you go out and you're meant to be using pressure and release and you use it really badly and your releases are really poor, your horse is not going to learn and they're going to get frustrated, and then you run into issues like a horse is being aggressive, or they're striking out at you, or they're just getting pissed off because they're like, what the heck are you trying to do? Communicate to me right now, I'm confused. So if you've tried positive reinforcement before, or you heard someone who has tried it and it hasn't worked for their horse, or it's caused issues, it's not the positive reinforcement, it's the way they were using it, they were just using it wrong, and that's totally fine. We've all been there. Most of the positive reinforcement trainers that people are learning from today, we all started back there, trial and error, trying to figure this stuff out on our own. And we ran into a lot of problems and we had to figure this out. And so we're here to show you guys that you don't have to do it the way we did it, and you don't have to just fail and run into walls and stuff, because we're here to teach you. I highly recommend that when you first start out with positive reinforcement training with your horse, work in protective contact. What is protective contact? So it essentially just means put a barrier between you and your horse. So this can be over a fence. So for example, if I was doing it here, I would be on this side and my horse would be on the other side. Or behind a stable door. Or you can also do it behind a reverse round pen. Why do we do this? Well, there's a few reasons. So the first reason is that when you first start working with food, it's very new to both you and your horse. You're gonna be fumbling around, you've got a clicker in your hand, potentially, you've got maybe a target stick, you've got a pouch, you're not used to it, okay? Remember, if you've ever started any new training method, whether that's learning how to lunge, even learning how to ride, remember how hard that was just to do the basics, okay? So this is probably what you're gonna feel like if you're very new to positive reinforcement. And your horse is also very new to this. And because they have that really strong seeking system, sometimes, especially when you're starting out, you may get frustrated, your horse may get frustrated or excited. The barrier is there to protect you guys. It's just to create a little bit of distance between the horse and the food and you to keep you guys safe if your horse does get frustrated or does display any overexcited behaviors, because it happens sometimes. All horses are different. I've definitely noticed that horses, especially off the track horses, can be really weird around food, okay? Because they haven't lived a very natural upbringing lifestyle. Usually they're stalled a lot. They're fed quite high energy food, frequently throughout the day. So that's a very high value resource for that horse. So they can be a bit loopy around food, okay? So sometimes you just need a barrier to keep you guys safe. It also helps you to kind of organize your thoughts and organize yourself, and without your horse constantly trying to mug you and you having to deal with that. It also helps your horse to learn to stand a safe distance away from you and that it's okay to stand there and the food's going to come to them, because this is something that horses don't intrinsically understand. They think that they always have to go and find the food. That's how their brain works. But when you're starting clicker training, you need to teach your horse, it's okay, the food always comes to you. You just have to do the thing. And how long this process takes really just depends on your horse. We're all different in the way that we learn. It doesn't reflect on you or your horse. You guys are just learning this together, have fun with it, take your time, just enjoy the whole experience. Once you're feeling confident in your horse and your ability to work with food, you can transition out of a barrier. You don't have to stay in there forever. Nowadays, most of the time when I'm working with a horse, because I have been doing this for so long, I don't even work behind a barrier unless that horse has known food aggression issues, because I don't need to, because I feel confident in the way that I'm able to manage that horse's behavior. So you're not always going to be behind a barrier, but when you're first learning, I really highly recommend it. Choosing a food reward for your horse. When we think of training with food, we think of treats. We think of something that's really yummy that your horse loves. But that is the complete opposite of what you want to do, okay? Do not do that. You want your treats to be boring as hell, because your horse already has such a strong seeking system. Even if it's just a handful of hay, your horse is going to want to work for that. Especially when you're first starting out, something really low value like hay that your horse normally gets. If you want to use their general, their daily meal, which I use for my horses, I find it super handy. Give your horse most of the food first so that they're not hungry and they're not frustrated because they're not able to get the bucket of food. Feed them first, then use the last little bit to do some trading, okay? Don't do it the other way around. Your horse is just gonna be super frustrated, super excited. They're not gonna be thinking it's gonna be all about the food. You do not want it to be all about the food. That is the last thing that you want. You want your horse to be able to learn and understand the behaviors and not be just obsessed with the food. So I love working with hay, hay pellets, copra, speedy beet, maxi soy, all wet down, and how it fluffs up like that. That's great. It's just pure, soft forage for your horse. It's a little bit messy sometimes. I love using that, especially if you've got a horse that's prone to choke, because choke is a very serious issue. It can happen at any point, at any time. Your horse can choke on literally any foods. I've had horses choke on their dinner. I've had horses choke on hay. I've never had a horse choke during training, so that's a good thing, because I don't give them very much food. Do not give your horse whole handfuls of food, especially at the start, because your horse is going to be snatching and trying to eat really fast. And what happens when they choke is that they swallow, and then at some point down their esophagus, the food gets stuck. Unlike us, if we get something stuck in our throat, we can't breathe. Horses can still breathe. So they can pass it on their own, but it is incredibly painful and incredibly distressing for them. Sometimes they can't pass it on their own, and you'll need to get a vet out to tube the horse, and you have to push the impaction down, which is just a horrendous experience for everybody. If your horse chokes and it isn't treated and you don't notice, because you don't always notice, some horses are really stoic, and the only symptoms you'll see is that they stop eating and drinking. Sometimes they'll be coughing, but sometimes they'll just be standing there and they're just not eating or drinking. Tarek choked once because I gave him a bucket of dry lucerne pellets because I'm an idiot, I know, dumb. And he didn't do anything except just walk over to me, look at me with this weird wide-eyed stance, and then just lay down flat on the ground. And like, he doesn't lay down. He barely ever rolls. He just laid down flat on the ground like this, like he was dead. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? But he passed it within a couple of minutes and it was fine. Aragon has choked really, really badly on his dinner because he likes to eat like the entire thing in one mouthful and then try and swallow it all. And he had to get the vet out and it was horrific, okay? And it can cause lots of complications. They can get rupture of the esophagus or necrosis of the tissue in the esophagus, and they can also aspirate it into their lungs. It's not good for anybody, but something to be very aware of at all points when you're with your horse, because again, they can choke on their hay. But especially if you're working with food, it's something to be aware of. When you're working with food, always have fresh water nearby for your horse. I mean, if you're working with your horse, always have fresh water available anyway, no matter what training methods you're using, especially with the tot. But especially when working with food, because if your mouth gets dry from eating too much, then you're less inclined to want to eat the food. So it just helps you guys keep that food as a high value resource. Do we always have to use food in positive reinforcement training? No. Positive reinforcement training, like I said, is just adding something that your horse enjoys when your horse does the thing that you want, to encourage more of that thing happening. So that can be scratches if your horse loves scratches. That can be pretty much anything that your horse enjoys. That's technically positive reinforcement. The reason we use food is because it is so easy, and because of the seeking system, it's a very powerful tool to use. So that's why I like to use food, but you can use scratches. I generally like to use scratches later on in my training, once we've built that relationship and the horse is more likely to just want to do a lot of things just for scratches. But scratches are only going to work if your horse likes scratches, and scratches, unlike food, can really change in whether your horse wants it or not, depending on how your horse is feeling. So it's just a little bit less of a reliable option, but it's definitely something that you can use. Start session signals and end session signals are very important when you're working with food, and are very, very, very important if you use different kinds of training methods together or separately. So like, for example, if sometimes you do only negative reinforcement and sometimes you only do positive reinforcement, you need to have a way to communicate that to your horse so your horse doesn't get confused. Because when a horse gets confused, that's usually when you start seeing problem behaviors. So what I like to do if I'm doing positive reinforcement, well, because I do positive reinforcement all the time, I just always have my treat pouch on. If I've got my treat pouch on, my horses know that there is a chance that they could potentially get what is in here. But if you're doing two different kinds of methods, I highly recommend only wearing your treat pouch if you're going to be using treats. Just so that your horse then starts to learn that if the treat pouch is on, there's something to be earned. And if the treat pouch is not on, then there's nothing to be earned. And then your horse has a pretty good understanding and doesn't get frustrated or stressed about the fact that they can't get the food. So that would be an example of a start session signal. Another start session signal might be you only train positive reinforcement in a specific area. So when you bring your horse in there, your horse is like, okay, I know that we're doing treat training now. That's another start session signal that I would recommend. End session signals are to indicate to your horse that the session is done, that the food is going to stop. Because if you do not communicate that to your horse is going to get stressed and frustrated. And to be very technical about it, withholding food would be negative punishment if you're looking at the little quadrants. But again, you don't need to know that. Just know that if you are giving your horse food and you're upregulating that seeking system and then you suddenly stop that and your horse doesn't understand why, then they're not going to feel very good about it. And they may get frustrated, they may get stressed, and they also may not want to engage and do the exercise again another day because they know that at the end of the session, they felt really bad. So just something to be aware of. End session signals, for me, I like to give my horse something to do. So because we've upregulated that seeking system, and because the way I train, I like to upregulate it a lot because I like to harness the crap out of that and get the most out of it that I can. If I'm then to suddenly leave and my horse has no outlet for that seeking system, then that's going to be a bad time for that horse. So I will give, for example, a slow feeder hay net with some hay in it. Tarek loves his little slow feeder. This is Tarek's GutzBusta's small, tiny whole hay net. This is the smallest that you can get. It's got high quality lucerne in it. So he gets this whenever we have a break during training. This will take him, I've left this out all night before and he hasn't been able to get through it in an entire night. So it's awesome. It makes him work. It gives him an outlet for that seeking system. It also keeps him working so that when I come back ready to train again or ready to work again, his seeking system is still ready to go. And I just change what it is that he's working for. So I highly recommend starting out having a hay net nearby. It can be good quality hay, it can be boring hay. It doesn't matter, just have something there for them to do. Another good idea is to have just like a bucket or a feed pan or whatever in your horse's working area. So when you are done, you can grab a handful of the food or a few handfuls and put it into that dish, and then your horse can eat that up while you leave. Because if you do that every time you end a session, every time you finish, then your horse is going to start learning, okay, that means that the training is over. Okay, so that's a really easy, clear way to communicate that with your horse as well. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys found that useful and maybe learned a little bit, maybe got a little bit more interested in positive reinforcement training. If you do want to continue learning, I am doing a video on all the different ways that we use positive reinforcement to get behaviors. So in that video, I'll be going over capturing, luring, targeting, and shaping, okay? So don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can be notified of when I drop that video. And if you're interested in starting positive reinforcement with your horse and you want to know what it is the first thing that I teach a horse, check out my video on head down for relaxation. Again, if it's not out yet, hit that notification so you can be notified of when I release that video. Alrighty, well, thank you guys for watching and I'll see you in the next video.